It's May the 4th. You know what that means. Star Wars, if you like that sort of thing. I personally like Star Wars, but not as much as Star Trek. Now, before you pull out the pitchforks and start stabbing the dislike button, give me a chance to explain. I want to start out by saying that Star Wars and Star Trek are different styles, and I would say comparing them is subjective. But I'm kind of cheating here. See, I'm not comparing the two directly. You'll see what I mean here in a second. So you look at Star Wars, it has 10 movies, it's about to have 11. You look at Star Trek, it has 13 movies. You might see where I'm going with this. So, I think it's fair to say reception of Star Wars movies is pretty mixed. The original trilogy is generally pretty well regarded, whereas the prequels are definitely mixed. And what's definitely mixed are the new Star Wars movies. Now, that's a can of worms I don't feel like opening up today, so I'll stay silent on my opinion on the new Star Wars movies for now, but I may talk about it later. And with Star Trek, the general rule is every other movie's not that great, and the ones in between are. It's considered that the odd numbered movies are the bad ones and the even numbered movies are the good ones. I would argue that's not entirely true, but as a general statement, it's also not entirely untrue. So I'm going to judge this by the number of great movies because I think that's a bit less complicated. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that more or less one or two movies, Star Wars has 5 great movies. And I mean great, not just good. And then let's say Star Trek also has right about that number. I would say it has just about 5 movies that are generally considered great, not going by my own opinion. Now, I have not seen every Star Trek movie nor every Star Wars movie, although I've come pretty close. The only Star Wars movies I haven't seen are the prequels and the Christmas special, if that even counts as a movie. The only Star Trek movies I haven't seen are Insurrection and Nemesis. However, my opinion is that most of the movies I've seen of both Star Wars and Star Trek, I've liked most of what I've seen. So I think it's fair to say that these are somewhat fairly matched as far as their movies. I personally prefer the Star Trek movies to the Star Wars movies, but that's not an objective thing, that's a subjective thing. When you go beyond movies, both Star Wars and Star Trek has video games, although Star Wars definitely has more. Both have comics and novels, but only one has TV shows, Star Trek. And this is very important because TV shows have always been the backbone of Star Trek. They were how it started, and how it's made most of its money and gained most of its popularity. The original series is one of the most important pieces of sci-fi history, and The Next Generation is flat out considered to be one of the best TV shows of all time. Despite the limitations of television, it clearly has a much bigger potential for storytelling over movies. It can switch between an episodic format, a huge story arc, miniature story arcs, and pretty much go through whatever type of story it wants to. Whereas though technically movies can accomplish that, they are much more limited because of the generally higher cost and much longer production time. I haven't seen every Star Trek show, but I have now seen all of the main ones. I'm currently in the first season of Deep Space Nine, have not seen Voyager, but I've seen the original series, The Next Generation, and Enterprise, and I think they're all really good shows in their own right, particularly The Next Generation and Enterprise. And Enterprise really represents telling a very long story that movies can't do very well. Take, for example, the 3rd season. That entire season is a long story arc. Also, with a show, they're much more free to experiment because they're not investing so much into it. They can take risks, sometimes they pay off, and sometimes they don't, and sometimes they produce something truly special. Another benefit to a series is how you can connect with characters, and how the show can explore their characters, and how the characters can develop over time, which isn't that utilized, but you can still get a much stronger connection with characters through a show than you could through a few movies. And the appeal of Star Trek is hard to deny. Though it may not have the same mainstream attention that Star Wars has, among critics and audiences it's very well regarded, and I think you can objectively say that the sheer volume of quality Star Trek material outweighs the volume of high quality Star Wars material. And I'm specifically talking about things that you can just sit back and watch. But beyond that, I think it's unfair to compare Star Wars and Star Trek, because though they are somewhat similar, the type of stories in them are very different. And sometimes they overlap, sometimes they're similar, but as a whole, they're very different in style. Star Trek has always been somewhat of an intelligent, thoughtful sci-fi, not to say that it's perfectly logical or anything. It generally tries to explore hypothetical situations, usually involving some sort of conflict that might arise with diverse alien cultures having to interact with each other, and how one might need to go about solving those conflicts, which allows it to tell several types of stories, anything from mystery to drama to adventure to action, and it does feature its fair share of action, whereas Star Wars is pretty much just shallow action in space. Something for more impatient, childish people. It's for people who want clear-cut good versus evil that doesn't feature anything deeper. So Star Wars definitely has its value in entertaining special ed people. That's a job just too simplistic for Star Trek to take over, so it's a good thing we have a dumbed-down alternative. So it's not fair to say that Star Trek is better because it serves a different purpose. Anyways, now that this video has reached its end, I'll leave you with this quote that should definitely prove that Star Trek is the better series.
Excuse me.
It will carry my power to every corner of creation.
Excuse me, I'd just like to ask a question. What does God need with a starship?
Now that you made it to the end of the video, don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed it, and if this is the first video of mine that you've seen, please check out some of my other videos. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.